HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Bloodborn by Cara Witter, Jancy Patterson, Megan Walker, and Lauren Janis. Read by Eunice Wong. Prologue. Year 1127 of the Banishment Era. Liara Diamis hoped she was going mad. She strained at the rope that bound her wrists and ankles to the rough wood table on which she now lay, tears streaming down her cheeks. The rope burned against her skin, and splinters poked through her thin cotton nightdress. "Please, Finian," she tried once more. "Please don't do this. I don't understand." The words choked around another terrified sob. He didn't answer, hadn't said more than a few words to her since she'd awoken here, bound to a table in the barn of his family farmhouse. Under the light of the lanterns hanging from the rafters, she could see him working at another table, mixing blood in vials and pots, flipping pages in old books, muttering to himself in the way she'd often catch him doing when he was planning military strategy late into the night. Those nights she'd put her arms around his shoulders and beg him to come join her in bed. He'd chuckle and pull her in for a deep kiss, and the world was right and true because they were together. Now all she could do was hope she was losing her mind, because that was far preferable to her husband being a blood mage who was holding her hostage and sharpening a small, curved knife. "No, please," she moaned as he turned to her, the knife catching the gleam of the lantern light. She struggled more, and the heavy table shifted. "Careful, love," Finian said. "You don't want to overturn the table and hurt the baby, do you?" She let out a fresh bout of whimpering as he mentioned their unborn child. He'd been so happy when she'd told him she was pregnant. He'd picked her up and spun her around, and they'd laughed and made love and talked about the kind of world they wanted their child to grow up in, the kind of world he was working to obtain, rising rapidly in the Sevairnese military. But blood magic... Finian would never do something like this. "What are you doing?" Liara pleaded. "What do you want with me? Why—" He shushed her as he drew closer, tracing along the hairline of her forehead with his fingers, gentle as he always was with her. "I know you're confused and afraid, Leah. I'm sorry for that, I am. But this is how it has to be." "How what has to be? Finian, let me go, and I promise I'll be a better wife. I'll do anything you say." "You've been the perfect wife," he said, giving her a sad smile. "And you'll continue to be the perfect wife after this. I'm not worried about that." She searched for anything in his expression that wasn't the man she'd known for years, the man who'd written her long love letters from the Andronish front, the man who'd had tears in his forest green eyes as he asked her to marry him. There were no tears now, but he looked to be the same man, the same handsome face, the same fiery red hair she loved to run her hands through, the same strong jaw and slim nose, the same expression he wore when he was about to leave her to return to his troops, serious and determined, always determined. He kissed her once with lips that felt dry against the sweat of her forehead. Then he lifted the front of the cotton nightdress, pulling it up until she was entirely exposed from her swollen stomach down. She shivered uncontrollably, though the air in the barn was stale and humid from a long, hot summer. "Please, no, whatever this is, please don't." "I'm sorry, love," he said, "but this is going to hurt." He began cutting on her skin, just above her belly button. Liara screamed, pain ripping through her abdomen as if she was being peeled apart. She screamed and screamed until she was hoarse, until the light in the barn began to fade to black. She didn't pass out, though. She desperately wanted to make this all go away, but she couldn't. The blackness faded again into the dim light of the barn, and Finian was no longer cutting her stomach with the knife, but standing back over by the other table. Liara gasped in choking breaths, trying to refocus her swimming vision. The baby. Had he been trying to cut out the baby? But it was only 5 months along. The child could never survive, not at this age. In panic, she pulled her head up enough off the table to look at her stomach, terrified of what she would see. And it was terrifying, but not what she expected. The swell of her belly was still there, but all around it, encircling her pregnant stomach like a pine bough wreath around a naming candle, were shapes and marks she didn't recognize, cut shallowly into her skin, all leaking dark blood down her sides and between her legs. The barn door creaked open, and a wild hope surged through her. Had someone heard her screams, even as far from the nearest town as they were? But the figure had only to step into the outer edge of the lantern light before that hope curdled to fear. The man was tall and lanky, wearing long, formal Vorgalian robes, though his peaked hood hung down behind his back. His hair was dark, and his cheeks covered in swirling tattoos that crept down his jawline to his neck. He made no move to save her, or even a move of surprise. He cocked his head and studied her like she was a mere curiosity, this woman lying half-naked and bloodied and strapped to a table. "The child?" the man asked, his tone flat. "I'm working on it," Finian snapped, not even turning around. He wiped his brow, leaving a smear of dark red, her blood, or blood from the other vials, across his eyebrow. "I had to prepare the womb." The tattooed man eyed the carvings on her stomach that wept blood, and Liara wanted to shrink inside herself, away from those dark eyes. And yet, some small measure of hope returned, mixed as it was with horror. Perhaps Finian wasn't a blood mage at all. Perhaps he was being used, turned into a blood puppet by this man. If so, then her husband was still somewhere inside, God's willing. Her husband who loved her, and loved their child, and dreamt of a better world. Finian finished swirling around a large glass decanter filled with dark blood, then began walking toward her again. He carried the decanter in one hand, the knife in the other. Liara's heart pounded near to bursting in her chest. Her only chance was to reach him, to free him from his blood magic shackles. "Finian, it's me," she said. "It's Liara, your wife. I know you're in there. I know it. Please, come back to me, my love. Please don't let him make you do this." Finian's brow furrowed, and for the barest of moments she thought maybe it was working. But then his lip quirked up in another of his sad, fond smiles. "He's not making me do anything, Leah. Lukos over there works for me, and both of us serve a higher power, a greater cause." He reached her side again and set the decanter down between her splayed knees. Then he gripped her hand, squeezing it gently. "And our child, love, will play an important role in that cause. I only wish you could live to see it." She moaned, managing to wrench her hand away from his. That had been her last hope, she realized. Her last prayer that her husband still existed, the man who would protect her at all costs. "You bastard!" she growled. "Leave our child alone." "I can't," Finian said. "Don't you see? She is what all of this was for." She? They had a daughter? Liara barely had time to process this before she saw the flash of the blade in his hand, and felt another searing, ripping pain, her stomach being split apart across its crown. Through her screams, which were hoarser than before, she could make out chants, words that flicked at the edges of her agony like the tongues of snakes. She lifted her head enough to see her stomach cut open, to see Finian's hands inside, blood and pink flesh, to see the other man, pouring the blood from the decanter onto the pulsing mass in her stomach. She did perhaps pass out then, but was jolted awake again by the crack of her head onto the table. Bile burned in her throat, leaked out the sides of her mouth. "All done." Finian's hand cradled her cheek. "For now, at least." She blinked at him, her eyelids so heavy, like her eyelashes were weighed down with stones rather than tears. "For now?" "The baby can only absorb so much at a time, so I'll have to keep doing this until she is born. It's the only way." Liara was so weary she could barely focus. And surely she was going mad, because as she strained her head to look at her stomach, she could see the skin knitting itself back together under the hands of the other man, the wounds closing, the blood becoming dried stains on an unblemished mound of flesh. And yet the threat of more of this, of even one more heartbeat of this. "You can't keep me here for months," she said. "My mother will come looking. She'll find me and report you to the speaker and—" "Your mother will see you next week, when we return to our house in the city. She'll find you in good health and refreshed from our visit to the country. So much so, she'll be thrilled when we continue to come out here for a few days every month, until our child is born." Liara shook her head. "I won't do it. I won't tell her." "Lukos will take care of that, love," Finian said. "He's quite good. You won't have to do anything at all. You won't be able to do anything." Her throat closed. A blood puppet. After all this torture she couldn't even begin to understand. He was going to make her a blood puppet. She wanted to scream every vile thing she'd ever heard at this monster who tricked her into believing he was a man. She wanted to claw out those eyes that she'd once stared into lovingly, wanted to rip out that fiery hair that she'd once hoped their child would inherit. But all she could manage was one word. "Why?" Finian smiled. "Because the world needs to be better, and our daughter, my creation, is going to make that happen." He stroked her hair again. "Goodbye, Leah." Behind him, Lukos began to chant, the words vile and chill. Our daughter, Liara thought, aching to hold her just once. And then all her thoughts ceased. 1. Sevairn tromped through a snowbank, wending her way up a trail she hadn't climbed in 30 years. Behind her, Nicanor followed, muttering to himself for the third time that he'd expected snow to be lighter, as if it should wisp up from the ground like spun sugar. The boy huddled under his cloak, only his nose showing, like he did at the slightest hint of rain. Jamie trailed several paces behind, watching his feet while he climbed, with a hunched posture and a sour look on his face. Farther up the trail, Sevairn felt Arkista calling to her, like a faint ray of light, slicing through the unending gloom. They'd had the sense to camp for the night at the base of the mountain, though she wasn't sure any of them had gotten any rest, what with Jamie's complaining and Nicanor's constant chattering about the myriad ways in which the cold both failed and exceeded his expectations. By Arkista's light, if she heard one more exclamation of, "I can see my breath!" she was going to leave them both on the trail and find the goddess alone. She probably should have, instead of waiting until morning as they'd agreed. "Ooh, snowflakes," Nicanor said, his voice filled with childlike wonder. "Did you see those snowflakes, Jamie?" "I wouldn't be too excited," Jamie said. "If they melt on your skin, won't they turn you into a fish?" "Maybe," Nicanor said. "Maybe if I were a fish, the feeling in my fingers would come back." Sevairn eyed Nicanor's hands, which were covered only by ordinary riding gloves, and thought with regret, not for the first time, that if she'd known they'd be taking this road, she would have insisted that they load up on proper provisions: fur coats, lined shoes, and the woolen scarves the locals knit from the beards of one-horned mountain goats. But after all the whining it had taken to get them this far, she wasn't about to suggest that they climb down again, not without Arkista. Sevairn tucked her hand inside the leather pouch at her belt. She and Nicanor had fashioned 4 of them from supplies they'd bought as they passed through Genaeum, thick sacks with firm latches that required both hands to unloose. Jamie's and Nicanor's hung lower on their hips, each containing one of the 4 godstones. Sevairn's, as of yet, remained empty. She knew where they were going, had guessed when they'd taken the thin path that diverged from the road toward Unlath, the one that ran by the village where she was born. Kenton had been right about the pattern. The gods chose bearers who were physically close to them. Sevairn had assumed that meant hers would be in Drapain, where she'd lived since she was young. But, apparently, she'd been chosen at birth. "Well, Sevairn," Jamie said, slumping down on a fallen log, his feet resting in a patch of snow. "I don't suppose Arkista is inspiring you to find her somewhere in the immediate vicinity? Or, better yet, somewhere down the mountain? An inn, perhaps, with warm beds and cheap ale and—" "No." Sevairn pointed up the trail as it grew steep and twisted around a bend. "It's up there. Probably a couple miles yet." Nicanor blinked at her. "She's that close?" Jamie sighed. "That's not the message I took from that. Besides, how would you know the distance? None of the other 3 were so useful. Is Arkista also the goddess of units and measures?" Nicanor shot an annoyed look at Jamie, which Sevairn understood all too well. Sevairn had been ready to kill Jamie by their second day on the road from Grisham. After nearly 3 weeks since, riding from Grisham to Andrenim, then an arduous hike through the mountains to avoid the border crossing at the soldier-heavy city of Jektai, even Nicanor's patience had long since worn thin. "There's a shrine up this way," Sevairn said. "Our matron of the waxing moon. When we returned from Drapain in the summers, my aunt would always insist we pay a visit." "It's summer now," Jamie said. "Why does it have to be so damned cold?" "We're far north and on a mountain," Sevairn said. "If it were winter, we'd be wading through 10 feet of snow, so count your blessings." "I wonder if I'd be able to breathe under the snow," Nicanor said. "Like I can under the sea. If there was an avalanche and—" Sevairn lengthened her stride, walking ahead of Jamie and Nicanor, out of range of the whining and the chatter, though not out of sight, lest Jamie decide to test Nicanor's theory and bury him beneath one of the piles of slush. Sevairn recited to herself the things she was going to do once she had the jewel. Catch a boat home to her husband, Quinn, and insist he continue with them to Peldenar, so she wouldn't have to be without him one more day. Find Kenton and Sara, and see Kenton's face when he had all 4 of his bearers together, with all 4 of their stones. Threaten that if Jamie wouldn't stop sniveling, she'd turn him into a moonbeam, or whatever it was that happened when non-bearers came into contact with the moonstone. She tried not to think about the miracles that had accompanied the claiming of the other 3 jewels. After seeing the chasm now surrounding Grisham, she was afraid of what Arkista might have in store. A mile or so later, Sevairn saw the familiar stone arch, carved with the phases in the moon across the top. Waning, new, waxing, full. Sevairn could almost feel the rays of light reaching her. She remembered when she was very small, one of the priests of Arkista told her that the goddess didn't make light, only reflected it. Now, even in the light of day, albeit diffused behind a layer of clouds, Sevairn imagined she could see Arkista's light, reflecting from beyond the trees, filtering through the dusting of snow like a lantern. She paused, waiting for Nicanor and Jamie to catch up. Nicanor reached her first, breathing into his hands to warm them, which would only serve to make them colder when his breath chilled against his skin. Jamie arrived long moments later, his boots dragging in the dirt. Both men had bright pink cheeks and noses. and Sevairn didn't imagine she was faring much better. Time to get this over with. Sevairn led them up the path to the arch. She remembered the building beyond, with its round, domed roof, its row of columns and steep stone steps. But as they passed under the arch, instead of the welcoming dome of the temple, Sevairn saw only ruin. The stones that had once been the foundation had been broken and upended, as if a team of men had first destroyed the floor with picks and then used a winch to wrestle the stones from their resting places. The columns that had once framed the front door lay toppled in the dirt, fractured in several places from the fall. Shattered glass sparkled among the drifts of snow. Even the domed roof had been entirely demolished, curved stones lying broken and jagged, like fragments of a dropped porcelain dish. Sevairn stood in silence, staring at the ruins as Nicanor and Jamie came up behind her. She supposed she should feel affronted on behalf of her goddess at the destruction, but somehow she only felt sad for her younger self. She'd always complained about the hike up the mountain to the shrine, but she recalled that her uncle had always packed honey drops and almond brittle for the trip. The inside of the temple was always lit with brilliant white light charms, which, on her last visit at the age of 15, Sevairn had complained was Vorgalian magic and not the light of Archista at all, for which she'd been summarily scolded by her cousin Elda. Bearer or not, Sevairn was far from devout. When she and Quinn had proven unable to have children, she had actively resented her daily walk past the temple in Drapane, a reminder that the so-called goddess of fertility hadn't seen fit to bless her. By then, Sevairn had decided Archista didn't exist. Still, there was something haunting about coming back to a place and finding it gone. "What happened here?" Nicanor asked, his blue lips quivering. "Diamis," Sevairn said. "We might have guessed. It stands to reason he'd have searched for the godstones in every available shrine. Maybe that's why he tore down all the ones in Foriclay, looking for Miralina." "So we hiked up here for nothing?" Jamie asked. "No, she's here. I can feel her." Sevairn strode over the rubble, stepping across fallen columns and overturned stones. She could hear the goddess below her, calling through the layers of dirt and rock, reaching up toward her, as if with invisible moonbeams. Sevairn wasn't about to say that aloud, little sense as it made, but she felt it all the same. "She's down there," Sevairn said. Jamie sat on one of the fractured pieces of granite column. "In the most inconvenient place possible. Who's surprised?" They all eyed the pile. Even Nicanor had stopped his chatter. Sevairn turned to Jamie. "I don't suppose your god would like to move the mountain of rocks for us?" Jamie rolled his eyes. "You'd have to ask him yourself. We're not on speaking terms." Nicanor, for about the 50th time that day, looked shocked by Jamie's blasphemy. But if Sevairn had to hear one more lecture about proper reverence and respect for the gods, she was going to tie them both to a cornerstone and hike back down the mountain to find a warm bed at an inn, alone and in peace. And unless Jamie's powers had changed in the last few weeks, Sevairn doubted Jamie's god sign, his ability to mold small pieces of rock, would help much with this task. Sevairn looked down at the dirt. They hadn't brought tools for digging, and certainly not the carts and winches and extra hands that would be best suited to this task. Even if they could tell others about their quest, they'd never be able to get all that up this mountain without attracting the attention of soldiers. Sevairn let out a long sigh. "All right, let's get started." Jamie raised an eyebrow at her. "Get started with what?" "Digging," Sevairn said. "We're going to have to dig her out." 2. They dug for hours, with nothing but their hands, until Nicanor's back and shoulders and arms ached so badly he wanted to cry. Maybe he had cried a little, because his nose was running like one of the taps back home at the fishhook. and his eyes burned. But that could have been the effect of the cold and wind, which stung more as the day wore on. Nicanor's gloves were coming apart, at the seam between his thumb and finger, his skin beneath raw at the knuckles and fingertips where they rubbed against the leather. He could no longer think of anything good to say about snow, especially when huge flakes of it started filling in the hole they were painstakingly scraping out. This was worse than any chore he'd ever been assigned back home, and that included both stall mucking and red-eye scaling. It might have gone faster had Jamie been a bit more helpful. He'd used his powers on the granite flooring, widening the cracks and helping remove the largest chunks using an iron bar, part of a decorative curtain rod, as a lever. But when it came to actual digging, Jamie had been about as helpful as a broom on a fishing trip. He sat by the edge of the opening, casually picking up and tossing a handful of dirt or chunk of rock here and there, muttering about bloody gods, so much that Nicanor wanted to hit him with every rock he dug from the hard ground. He wondered if this was what Kenton felt like all the time. It would certainly explain some things. Sevairn groaned and sat back on her heels. Her face was patchy red, and she wiped her nose with the back of her gloved hand, leaving a dirt streak across her face like a mustache. It might have been funny, but Nicanor was about 3 hours and a full missed mealtime past finding anything funny. He leaned back on his heels, arching his back to stretch it out. "Can you tell if we're getting close?" Sevairn shook her head. "Not really. I mean, it feels about the same as when we started. I know she's down there, but I have no idea how far." "Well, that's comforting." Jamie studied a small rock in his hand. Nicanor was pretty sure he'd been doing nothing but staring at that blasted rock for the last several minutes. "I wouldn't want to think we were making progress." "Nicanor and I have been," Sevairn snapped back. "We might make more if you'd help." Jamie glared at her from across the large hole. "I am helping. I'm here, aren't I? I trekked all the way across the bloody country and up this mountain, and I'm freezing my balls off because the bearers need to be together, or some nonsense that Sarah wisely ignored, when what I really should be doing is ditching the ridiculous chases the gods have us on and finding Eric and—" "Why don't you?" Sevairn snapped. "Kenton made you come with us, but Kenton isn't here now. If you want to go, then march back down the mountain. Find yourself a boat to Peldenar and feed yourself to Diamis." Nicanor stared at Sevairn. She couldn't mean that. All 4 of them were needed to save the world. Sarah had left them when she took the throne of Tirastar, but at least they knew where she was. Jamie couldn't go wandering off by himself. "Right," Jamie said. "Because last time I tried to do something on my own, it turned out splendidly." Nicanor couldn't help but agree. That was why they were in this fix to begin with. Jamie had tried to protect his uncle, even after he found out his uncle was ratting them out to Diamis. When his uncle turned on Jamie as well, they'd all nearly been taken by Diamis soldiers. All the more reason they shouldn't be alone, miserable as they were together. "Your meddling didn't help the situation either," Sevairn said. "Just ask Daniella." Nicanor winced as Jamie's expression hardened. It was a harsh statement, but true. Jamie had lied to Daniella, lied to all of them, and when she'd found out about it, she'd run away from him. That's why Daniella was being dragged back to her father, while the rest of them had escaped. They all knew it, and they had no way to know if Kenton had caught up to Daniella's captors by now. Jamie took the rock he'd been studying and threw it back down into the hole. "Fine. If that's how you feel about it, maybe I will march down the mountain and—" "You can't," Nicanor said, his stomach sinking. "You can't run off alone. None of us can." Jamie snorted, dusting off his hands. "Better than being in the company of you two." He loosened the belt at his waist, the holster containing his god. "You can keep Kotali while you're at it. Then you'll all be free of—" "Stop it!" Nicanor yelled, startling even himself. His hands balled into fists. "Stop being a whiny, entitled ass!" Both Jamie and Sevairn's eyes went wide. The belt slipped from Jamie's fingers, hanging still half attached at his waist. Nicanor's heart beat unsteadily. He felt simultaneously like he wished he could disappear and like he wanted to rage at Jamie. Since he couldn't do the former, he...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?